The Young and the Restless spoilers. Christine Blair and Danny Romolotti's long-awaited wedding celebration unfolded exactly the way the citizens of Genoa City secretly feared it would, a painfully polite, excruciatingly wholesome event that had all the emotional intensity of a lukewarm mug of water left out on the counter overnight. For months, viewers had endured 17 interruptions, a dozen manipulative detours, several emotional déjà vu breakdowns, and more recycled meant-to-be speeches than any functioning adult should have to withstand, yet here they were, finally married, legally bound, and ready to celebrate in what could only be described as the most sedating wedding reception in the show's recent history. It felt less like a party and more like a mandatory workplace seminar on safe elevator usage. Even the floral arrangements looked like they regretted attending. People didn't arrive expecting fireworks. No one expected dramatic confrontations, overturned tables, or passionate declarations. After all, this was Cricket's wedding. The most rebellious choice she has made in decades was wearing a shade of ivory that could, under aggressive lighting, almost be confused with off-white. The bar was never high. But what the residents of Genoa City found themselves trapped in was something beyond tradition, beyond formality, beyond basic politeness. It was an endurance test. A silent competition to see who could remain conscious the longest. And judging from the way several attendees were subtly adjusting their posture, discreetly stretching their legs, and accidentally bumping into waiters for refills, it was obvious that Danny's rock star mystique alone could not save the atmosphere. There were only two things keeping the entire room from slipping into a medically concerning collective nap: the constant buzz of whispered speculation about whether Phyllis Summers had somehow sabotaged the wedding flowers, and the knowledge that Daniel Romolotti and Tessa Porter were preparing a musical surprise that might, if they were lucky, inject at least 30 seconds of genuine excitement into the proceedings. The guests clung to that hope like castaways clinging to a floating piece of driftwood. Even the officiant, who wasn't technically part of the reception, had lingered awkwardly near the exit, perhaps hoping the music would begin soon enough to justify saying he stayed for the atmosphere. Cricket, meanwhile, was radiating a level of joy rarely seen outside of self-help commercials or antidepressant advertisements. She floated around the room with the unwavering enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed her story was the grand romance of Genoa City history. Every smile she delivered was bright enough to illuminate a powerless hospital wing. Every laugh was high-pitched and hopeful, the kind of laugh that tries to force everyone else to participate in its cheerfulness. She kept repeating the same line over and over: "Never give up on love." As if she were performing in an inspirational infomercial and being compensated per repetition. Guests nodded politely, pretending to be moved, while quietly wondering how many more hours they needed to endure before it became socially acceptable to leave. Danny Romolotti, the groom, stood beside her looking like a man who had stepped into a time capsule and emerged in an alternate universe where his entire identity as a rock legend had been replaced with the guy who helps Christine refill her printer ink. His smile was polite, soft, maybe even sincere in its own way, but there was no denying the flicker behind his eyes. The faint shadow of a man remembering the years when he stood on massive stages, thousands of fans screaming his name, passion blazing like fireworks around him. Now he was listening to speeches about the importance of mutual respect during tax season. It was whiplash-level contrast. Danny had lived through whirlwind romances, dramatic heartbreaks, passionate reconciliations. He had traveled the world, broken hearts, written songs that defined entire eras of Genoa City pop culture. Yet now he was married to a woman whose idea of living dangerously was eating carbohydrates after 8 p.m. Cricket wasn't a bad person, not even close. She was responsible, kind-hearted, dedicated, and impossibly earnest. But she was also, without exaggeration, the human embodiment of beige. A woman who could make a courtroom filing sound like the highlight of her month. Someone who had never said or done anything impulsive unless you counted agreeing to dessert at a restaurant. Her presence at a social event created a vacuum where chaos, spontaneity, and excitement went to die. And so, the great romance of Christine and Danny, two individuals with wildly different energy signatures, felt less like a passionate reunion and more like a joint decision to pursue early bedtime and quiet dinners for the rest of their lives. The real tragedy, of course, wasn't that Phyllis Summers had lost Danny. The tragedy was that Danny had willingly chosen a future so predictable it could be automated. Phyllis, with all her fire, manipulations, unpredictability, and emotional intensity, had been the chaos that balanced Danny's calm. Their chemistry burned. Their fights ignited entire storylines. Their makeup sent fans into spirals. Cricket, on the other hand, was comfortable. Reliable. Safe. She was the metaphorical cup of plain oatmeal you eat because your stomach hurts. She was tea without sugar, movies without plot twists, yoga without the stretching. She had the personality of a tax form and the romantic flair of a DMV waiting room. Still, the guests knew better than to express such thoughts aloud. Instead, they circulated politely, clutching champagne glasses as if holding onto tiny life preservers. Every time Cricket began another speech about how love always finds its way, another hand quietly reached for the bottle. Even Nikki Newman, with her years of social polish, seemed to be discreetly signaling for an extra pour. Victor Newman, who rarely looks bored, had the expression of a man silently evaluating whether he could fake an urgent business call convincing enough to justify leaving early. Phyllis Summers, on the other hand, was a force of nature simply by existing in the same room. She had promised Daniel she would behave herself, and technically, she was honoring that promise. In the same way a tornado technically honors property lines. She smiled, she mingled, she occasionally narrowed her eyes at Cricket like a cat watching a bird feeder. The rumor about the sabotaged wedding flowers had spread so thoroughly that half the guests were still inspecting the arrangements for signs of tampering. Phyllis pretended not to notice, pretended not to enjoy the suspicions swirling around her like a crown made of tension. But Daniel had seen the glimmer in her eye, the restless energy vibrating beneath her surface. She had sworn she would behave for more than 5 minutes, but anyone who had ever met Phyllis knew that was an ambitious promise at best. Meanwhile, the supposed highlight of the evening was still yet to come, the musical collaboration between Daniel and Tessa Porter. The mere anticipation of it had become the emotional caffeine that kept the event alive. Guests whispered about it with the kind of excitement usually reserved for meteor showers or flash sales. Any moment now, Daniel would take the stage with Tessa, and the reception might, if the universe was merciful, experience its first genuine heartbeat of entertainment. Even the servers seemed to be quietly timing their tray rotations around the expected performance. But before the music, before the dramatic possibility of Phyllis exploding into chaos, before Danny and Cricket could deliver yet another round of sentimental speeches, the mood of the reception settled into something so uniquely dull that it became almost impressive. Rarely had Genoa City seen an event so dependably calm, so gently monotonous, so overwhelmingly polite. Every story told at the tables involved minor inconveniences, mildly amusing anecdotes, or safe reflections on shared history. It was like attending a support group for people who had forgotten how to have fun. Yet underneath all that stillness, the real story wasn't the decor, the vows, or even the marriage itself. The real story was the collective emotional dissonance of a room full of people who had witnessed Danny's past loves, past passions, past fire, and were now attempting to convince themselves that this neatly packaged, aggressively wholesome version of his life was somehow satisfying. They smiled because the moment required it, but their eyes told a different truth. They respected Cricket, cared about her, appreciated her goodness, but they could not shake the feeling that Danny Romalotti, the rock star who once lived larger than life, had willingly stepped into a world made of bubble wrap and decaf tea. And so, the reception continued. Smiles pasted, champagne flowing, speeches looping, Phyllis plotting, Danny adjusting his tie, Cricket glowing, and Genoa City collectively praying that Daniel and Tessa would start singing before their souls drifted out of their bodies from sheer boredom. But of course, no wedding reception in Genoa City, especially one involving Christine Blair and Danny Romalotti, could ever stay safely bland for long. Genoa City simply does not allow an event with this many emotional tripwires to pass without detonating at least one of them. It is a town where secrets ferment like unpasteurized wine, where grudges age like vintage cheese, where no promise survives its own sincerity. And when the promise is made by Phyllis Summers, everyone knows the countdown begins the moment the words leave her lips. She had vowed to Daniel, sworn on every wounded maternal instinct she possessed, that she would behave herself for longer than 5 minutes. A noble intention. A beautiful idea. And an absolute impossibility. Expecting Phyllis to remain calm at her ex's wedding was like expecting a lit match to refrain from burning. It was simply not in her nature. The tension began quietly, like a hairline crack forming beneath a flawless surface. A few lingering glances from Phyllis toward Christine's table. A faint twitch of her eyebrow every time someone referred to Cricket as radiant. A forced smile that pulled tighter every time Danny brushed Cricket's arm with the kind of gentle affection that made Phyllis look as if she wanted to personally sue the concept of tenderness. And as the room grew more comfortable, more convinced that Phyllis had truly surrendered her flair for chaos, her restlessness intensified. She paced softly in her heels, drifting from group to group, filling her champagne glass with religious consistency as if she were hydrating her inner demons for later use. Cricket remained blissfully unaware, of course. She floated through the evening like a woman powered by optimism rather than electricity. Her idea of danger was a slightly overcooked risotto. Her idea of rebellion was wearing perfume stronger than her usual fresh linen. She never imagined that Phyllis might be plotting anything. Cricket believed in fairness, trust, and emotional clarity, 3 concepts Phyllis interacts with the way a cat interacts with a full glass of water on the edge of a counter. But even Cricket, in her innocent buoyancy, could sense the subtle gravitational pull forming behind her, an atmospheric shift she couldn't quite place. It was like feeling a drop in barometric pressure before a storm, except the storm had red hair, flawless lipstick, and emotional impulse control equivalent to an overheated blender. Danny sensed it too. Not consciously, he was trying his best to pretend everything was serene, yet some instinct awakened in him, an old memory from 100 past encounters. A memory of Phyllis smiling too brightly, speaking too softly, appearing too composed. He recognized that particular shade of calm. It was the calm of a predator before pouncing. Danny had been in stadiums facing tens of thousands of screaming fans without flinching, but the sight of Phyllis sipping champagne without talking sent a specific chill crawling up his spine. Only one thing scares a man who has lived through rock stardom, fame, heartbreak, and public scandal: a quiet Phyllis. The first crack in her restraint came during the speeches. Nina Webster rose, clearing her throat, launching into a heartfelt tribute about 2 people destined to find their way back together, and Phyllis nearly choked on her champagne. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet, accidental cough, but sharp enough for everyone within a 10-foot radius to turn and look at her. She smiled politely, dabbing her lips, but the damage was done. Cricket frowned briefly, then brushed it off as Phyllis simply swallowing the wrong way. A mistake Danny wished she had swallowed years ago. Daniel noticed, narrowed his eyes, and silently mouthed something that looked suspiciously like "Imam, please." But Phyllis was already drifting, the champagne unlocking the door she'd tried so hard to keep shut. She didn't intend to cause trouble, not at first. She simply wanted to adjust a floral arrangement that was leaning slightly off-center. But adjusting turned into rearranging, and rearranging turned into quietly plucking out one of the roses that had been placed by Christine's request. It was a subconscious act, a twitch of old habits resurfacing after years of emotional muscle memory. By the time she realized what she'd done, several guests were whispering again, squinting toward the flowers as if investigating a crime scene. Phyllis pretended innocence, but her pulse quickened, her cheeks glowed, and her self-control began dissolving like cotton candy in boiling water. Then came the real trigger. The flashpoint. The tiny spark that ignited her entire emotional combustion engine. It happened during the father-daughter-esque moment between Christine and Daniel, a soft hug, a sentimental look, a sweet comment about how proud she was of the man he has become. It was harmless on the surface. Innocent even. But something in Phyllis snapped. Something ancient and primal and deeply, instinctively maternal. She had fought the world for Daniel, sacrificed reputation after reputation, burned bridges, rebuilt them, then burned them again. She had raised him, protected him, obsessed over him, hovered over him like a malfunctioning guardian angel. And now Christine, prim, polite, painfully neutrally toned Christine, was trying to claim a tender emotional moment with her son? Absolutely not. Not today. Not ever. The shift was immediate. The music softened. The air thickened. And every veteran trouble detector in the room, Nikki, Lauren, even Victor, turned their heads at the exact same moment, sensing the approaching explosion. Phyllis moved, not quickly, but with the deliberate stride of a woman who had made a decision she could no longer unmake. She approached Christine and Danny with a smile that was far too calm, far too polite, far too controlled to be genuine. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step a countdown. Daniel saw her coming and immediately panicked. His eyes widened. He mouthed a frantic "Mom, no." But it was too late. Phyllis placed a hand on Christine's arm with the gentle, affectionate pressure of someone about to perform emotional manslaughter. And then, politely, sweetly, devastatingly, she opened her mouth. What came next wasn't a scream, or a slap, or a glass thrown across the room. No, Phyllis was far more dangerous than that when she truly focused. What came next was subtle. Surgical. A perfectly crafted emotional incision delivered with precision that would make a neurosurgeon weep. She congratulated Christine. But not sincerely. She congratulated her as only Phyllis could, layered, sweetly weaponized, laced with undertones that suggested everything from pity to superiority to thinly masked disbelief that this marriage would last. She praised Christine's perseverance in finally getting what she wanted after all these years. She complimented the wedding. The flowers. The dress. The theme. She used words like simple, respectable, and comforting, each one carefully chosen to stab without drawing visible blood. Guests froze mid-sip. Conversations halted. Even the band seemed to falter for half a beat. Christine blinked, unsure whether she was being praised or insulted. Danny inhaled sharply, recognizing the old Phyllis, brilliant, terrifying, unstoppable. Daniel tried to intervene, but Phyllis gave him a look that could have evaporated granite. And then she delivered the final blow. The quiet, devastating whisper that carried across the entire room without needing to be loud. Well, I hope this marriage is everything you think it is. A sentence that sounded like goodwill, but felt like a curse. The room froze. Cricket's smile wavered. Danny's spine straightened. And Phyllis, beautiful, furious, victorious, sipped her champagne like she had just scored the winning point in a silent emotional war. The wedding had been boring. Predictable. Lifeless. But now? Now it was Wayanar again.